Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, April 6th, 2023. And our top story today, for-profit philanthropy is eroding the foundations of charitable giving. Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Dana Brakman and Reiser and Stephen A. Dean of Brooklyn Law School. They're also the authors of For-Profit Philanthropy, Elite Power, and the Threat of Limited Liability Companies, Donor Advised Funds, and Strategic Corporate Giving. Well, Dana, Stephen, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. We're going to be talking about kind of the underpinnings, the legal foundations of charitable giving. But I want to start, Dana, I'll start with you, and then we can kind of pivot over to Stephen. What is for-profit philanthropy? I know many people know what, I think in general, what philanthropy is and what charitable donations are, but how do you define for-profit philanthropy?
Sure. So for-profit philanthropy is a term that we decided to use in writing our book of that name in order to encapsulate a type of phenomenon that we're seeing over and over in the charitable giving sector, where players and practices and norms that are really native to the for-profit sector are migrating over into the philanthropic sector and being used there. And this is natural when donors, whether they're individual donors or corporate donors, see the business practices and business norms and their contacts, other players in the business world, leading them to great success in their business endeavors. They're going to want to transplant them over into their philanthropic endeavors. So it's a natural impulse. But the regulatory system that we have in place to tame the kind of inherent elitism of philanthropy doesn't really contemplate that kind of importation. It really thinks of the nonprofit and for-profit sectors as silos. And so these innovations are straining that regulatory system and making it harder for society to have kind of both insight on what's happening in philanthropy and influence on how philanthropic spending and kind of philanthropic influence gets deployed in our society.
And Stephen, I mean, Dana, I know you both co-authored a very important book. We'll talk a little bit about it a little bit later on. Some of these principles are in there, but many Americans are familiar with endowments and foundations as the channel by which, and of course the individual giving. But does this strike you as deleterious or dangerous when it comes to taking some of these for-profit processes and trying to apply them to charitable giving? And does this deny the individual the opportunity to have an impact as an investor or as a charitable donor?
Well, what I would say is that, first of all, I agree with everything Dana said, but I would just say that this is neither inherently good or bad. It is really just a change. I think is almost geologic in its timetable. Right, this is something that happens slowly, and a change that is overtaking the sector. And just like any natural process, I don't think this is something that we should necessarily be worried about. But it is something that, as Dana suggested, the existing regulatory framework that dates largely to 1969 really just doesn't have the capacity to handle. So what we need to think about as a society is what philanthropy is for, right? Why do we allow it? So if you think about why we have philanthropic foundations, why do we allow extremely rich people to put their stamp on a big pot of money and decide what happens to it? I mean, in a way, that's what we have taxation for, to make sure that a portion of the wealth that really powerful individuals earn goes back to the public. But we, for some reason, allow these extremely wealthy, powerful individuals to, just sort of stamp their own brand on it. And there must be some reason we do this. Maybe we think that they're going to provide services that government won't be able to provide for us, or maybe they'll be more generous than they would be if we are taxing it away and spending it ourselves. And when we think about why we have philanthropy, we can think about what sorts of rules we want to set as a society, as Dana suggested, to govern that. But we have to figure out why we have it in order to figure out what we want it to do and what limits we want to place on it. I don't think that, I think at its best, philanthropy, and I think of one of my favorite philanthropists, Julius Rosenwald. So he, back in the early 20th century, used his wealth, and he used it quickly and just he, in an urgent way. He built a whole series of schools in the segregated South for Black children. And this is something that the government was not doing. This is something that if we had just taxed away his fortune, these schools would not have been built. But you've never heard of the Rosenwald Foundation because its work was so urgent that he wanted all the money spent right away. So we've heard of a lot of other foundations that see themselves as more perpetual, but we don't know anything about the Rosenwald Foundation. And I think that's a real shame, because that's really, in the work that we've done, one of the institutions that I've really come to admire the most.
Yeah, Dana, just to kind of pivot back to you for a second, why is the enforcement or the regulatory apparatus so far behind? And I think about SEC and how the SEC reviews mutual funds and oversees and regulates markets. Why is the apparatus behind when it reviews some of the different vehicles available now and how people direct foundation money?
So foundations are pretty fully regulated, and that's actually the regulatory framework that we're alluding to, is the framework that applies to foundations. But these new innovations in a variety of ways avoid being treated as foundations. And so the way that the regulatory structure works, and we argue that this was very intentional, is instead of a kind of command and control, if you do philanthropy, you must do this, right? What happened in this 1969 legislation that Stephen alluded to is the creation of the foundation concept under federal tax law. And basically, we see it as a bargain where foundations, as kind of organized vehicles for philanthropic giving, had come into wide use among a certain cadre of very wealthy individuals starting in the beginning of the 20th century, and were extraordinarily suspect. We tell a story in the book that other scholars have related as well about how Rockefeller tried to get a charter for his Rockefeller Foundation from Congress, and they turned him down because they thought he was too powerful to run that kind of organization. He was already having enough influence, and they didn't want his potential influence to be magnified by a philanthropic foundation. So there was a huge amount of skepticism around the influence being held in these institutions. And in 1969, kind of the forces converged, and the development of this vehicle was a real compromise, where the private foundation, this tax category, was created. And it's an opt-in, right? If you want to do philanthropy, you can do it as people do now in some of the structures that we describe, including using a limited liability company or through a donor advised fund, or just in-house in your corporation without using a corporate foundation. You can do that. And you may even be able to get certain tax advantages for it. But the foundation form was, kind of an enticement. Please, philanthropists, come and do your philanthropy as a foundation. And if you do so, we'll give you this package of tax benefits, which at the time, when tax rates were much higher, was somewhat more of an inducement to use the form, as well as you would be able to keep perpetuity. What Stephen is describing was very much under fire, and there's right up to the end of the legislative battle over this statute, there was in the bill an idea to time limit the lifetime of foundations. That was ultimately removed as part of what we see as this bargain, and you would be able to retain total autonomy. right? And it was a way to conduct philanthropy that kind of got that skepticism to abate, right? And now we think of foundations as these, wonderful, generous, benefactors who do great things for society, kind of totally change the image of this practice, but maybe even too well, right? Because now what we're seeing is folks are avoiding the structure that foundations impose, which not only has these, two sides of the bargain, but also gives society all kinds of transparency with the disclosure obligations that foundations have. It sets up guardrails about what kinds of activities count, right, as philanthropy, not, burnishing your own business or pursuing your political preferences, as well as timing requirements, right? That there have to be kind of annual disbursements of the assets as opposed to just, saying, well, I'm creating this thing, but who knows when society will ever get the benefits, right? So all of that is encompassed in using a foundation form. And so now as folks either pull out entirely from using that form or use it selectively, society loses the ability to kind of influence how philanthropy is practiced and to have the ability to observe what's going on. So we think you need to have some new ways to get those values into philanthropy. Not that everyone's going to, use a foundation again, and that wouldn't even be a great idea, right? They're from 1969. You don't want to drive a 1969 car, right? we have a lot of improvements we could make to philanthropic regulation, but we need to get those values of transparency and timing and really targeting of philanthropy with public input back into the system.
Well, and I would just add to that, I agree with Dana. We need to figure out what the values are that are important. But as she said, the things that we cared about in 1969 are not necessarily the same things we care about today. So maybe we care about transparency, timing, and targeting, as we talk about in the book, as the values that undergirded the 1969 Act. But we may also value diversity in a way that we didn't in 1969. And we need a regulatory framework that is going to, and I keep coming back to that Rosenwald Foundation, to really embrace what that organization did. And that in a way, the 1969 Act was a reaction against. I think in 1969, there was skepticism of the civil rights work of some of the big foundations. And that's incredibly part of what motivated the 1969 Act. They were trying to curtail some of what we would be really more encouraging of today.
Well, thanks, Stephen and Dana. When we come back, we'll talk more about what can be done to improve charitable giving. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're joined this morning by Dana Brakman Reiser and Stephen A. Dean of Brooklyn Law School. Dana, Stephen, thanks so much for sticking around with us for segment number 2 this morning.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And Stephen, I want to come back to you. I want to start with you in this segment. There's a very popular vehicle called the Donor Advised Fund, and you talk a little bit about it in the book. It's a investment vehicle, more or less. What is it, and how is it used?
So it depends on who's using it, but for most ordinary folks, what a donor advised fund it's essentially a way of streamlining your charitable giving. Rather than donating all to individual charities, you can donate to a single fund that's organized by Fidelity or Goldman or whoever you work with, whoever you have your investments with. You can create a donor advised fund, and it allows you to use that platform as a platform for giving, right? So you give to your donor advised fund, you take a charitable contribution deduction, which is very helpful these days now that the standard deduction is quite high. Many people are able to use the donor advised fund to put several years of charitable donations together to make it deductible in a single year, and then they just give, and they give from their donor advised fund. And we think that we were mentioning before that we don't think for-profit philanthropy is necessarily a bad thing, and a lot of people are using donor advised funds in really positive ways, and I think it's offers a great deal of potential to democratize giving and to bring in a lot more people into the charitable space that might have felt excluded in the past, just they didn't quite know what all the tricks were. And now some of these big commercial sponsors are opening the way for more people to participate. But what we see as more of a challenge is the way some of the largest donors are using them. So we learned by accident that Steve Ballmer created $1 billion donor advised fund, not a foundation, so it wasn't subject to the rules created in 1969 to make foundations and elite giving safe. And we learned about it by accident and accidental disclosure by the IRS. And it just makes you wonder what exactly that was. We don't have any of the information that we would have gotten if this were a foundation. So we're just left to wonder.
And Dana, I mean, Stephen brings up some really good points and a really good example. Because someone like myself, I'm not going to have the Jeff Snyder Foundation, and arguably if I did, it would be a very small foundation with very little funding. But this, in all seriousness, this donor advised fund opportunity gives me an opportunity to direct it to philanthropic ventures that I might see that might be important to me and realize those benefits. But how do you stamp out some of this non-transparent use of some of these tools? Like, they, as Stephen mentioned, what Steve Ballmer of the former executive for Microsoft was doing with this type of fund.
Yeah, well, there are, I think one key thing, and this is something that there have been a number of interesting proposals, including a bill in Congress to try to deal with some of these issues. So one thing that you can do is address the timing concerns that we have, right? Because remember, foundations, they have to make a payout every year of 5% of their assets, and a donor advised fund is not subject to that payout requirement. So you get your immediate tax deduction when you put your funds in, and then you can send the advice to the to Fidelity whenever you want about spend my money out to this charity or this other charity over time. And if you don't do it or you forget to do it, you can even pass on those advising rights to your heirs, right? So this could be a very long timeline before the giving actually gets activated into, operating charities. And this is one of the real concerns, and it's a concern even for smaller donors, right? Because smaller donors could also just write a check to their local charity, right, and not necessarily have that, that intermediary step. And if we're trying to get money to charities to, improve healthcare, deal with, education, hunger, all climate change, right, all of these huge issues, having the money just sit and, continue to grow through investment is a problem, right? So so this bill in Congress, the ACE Act, has tried to tie the deduction that one receives to how fast that money is being spent out, right? So that would be an incentive to actually get the money not just into donor advised funds, but out of them to operating charities. And we certainly support that. Another idea that we talk about in our book that we think would be really important is around disclosure, right? So again, by avoiding the foundation requirements, you avoid disclosures, which require foundations to disclose who their donors are and where they're making expenditures in public forms that are available for everyone to look at on the World Wide Web. So for a donor advised fund, the fund itself does have to make a similar kind of disclosure. So Fidelity or Goldman or Vanguard has to make a similar disclosure, but they have millions of accounts and it's all aggregated. So you can't match. That's why we don't know where the funds in the example that Stephen gave would actually be spent out to. We just know they went into the donor advised fund. So we think disclosure would be another really good way to fund by fund disclosure would be another really good way to get more accountability, like you're talking about, into the donor advised fund system. And then finally, and really going back to what Stephen was saying, we think that you could really activate some of the value of these platforms. Not just relying on, kind of a regulatory, you must do this, you must do that, but these platforms are really good at certain things. They're really good at dealing with non-cash assets, right? So you could write a check to your local soup kitchen, but you can't give them your, small Van Gogh sketch, right? What are they going to do with that, right? Or your shares in a private company, right? Or your, real estate easement, right? It's very hard for them to negotiate that into actually feeding the hungry. And these platforms are really good at that, right? In the same way that they're good at, doing some of the, efficiency generating things that we talked about before. So harnessing those platforms and having them do things like identifying charities to whom funds that have lain dormant will go to, right? If there are no recommended, advised expenditures for a certain amount of time, a year, 2 years, or, not reaching a minimum amount, then we're going to spend them out, and we're going to spend them out to these charities who we think are, underfunded, or who are, really good, at what they do, are, doing really important things, are aligned with our charitable mission as an organization. That would be really helpful because they have this huge platform, right? They could really be educating their customers about how to spend their money in the way that community foundations, which really pioneered donor advised funds, typically do. So we would love to see not just kind of regulatory changes, but even encouraging these platforms to use the power they have as platforms to make charitable giving more transparent, more effective, and also perhaps more equitable, right? We really advocate using that power that they have in that direction.
Yeah, and Stephen, Dana makes some really good points. I think about the smaller not-for-profits, the smaller charities who maybe don't have a full staff. The big organizations, the big not-for-profits that we all know of, American Cancer. These are big apparatus. They have large groups of people that help write grants and do all this thing. But the smaller not-for-profits, this transparency would be very helpful when writing grants or asking for money. And talking about equity, this would create some equity for them in terms of being able to access some of this money that maybe they weren't necessarily able to access because they didn't know about it.
Absolutely. And I'd just like to emphasize, one of the things that we are not saying is that we think foundations are perfect and that they are something that we really want everybody to use all the time. As you said, the Jeffrey Snyder Foundation, however much we'd all like to see it, would not be a great idea. It would
be very small.
Right, it would not be a great idea, but you can use, in a perfect world for me, donor advised funds would, become just a resource for charities and for charitable giving. And they would really use the kinds of economies of scale that they have to make more charity available for the needs that need it most. It's certainly possible. It doesn't, and this is another point Dana made that I'll just underscore, it doesn't require government regulation, right? These organizations, they're so few, right? So Fidelity and Vanguard just alone got together and thought hard about how they could support charities and charitable donors. They could do enormous things without anybody, without big government stepping in and telling them what to do. And we just like to encourage them to think about that.
Yeah, really, really good advice. Really important. I mean, this is an area that doesn't get covered. I don't think it gets covered enough. I mean, this is really important. These not-for-profits, these charities really do some great work, especially at the local level. Taking advantage of this would be exceptionally helpful. Stephen, Dana, we're going to have to leave it there. We certainly didn't give enough time to this topic, but really appreciate you joining us on the program this morning. And we look forward to having you back again very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
And that wraps up this episode of BRNAM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more in all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content? Well, visit our website and, of course, all of our streaming partners. We're back again tomorrow. We'll be taking a look back at one of our best of shows. And then on Saturday, we'll be doing another edition of BRN Weekly, where we take a look back at some of our best segments of the week. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving. And don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.
Tax audits, tax liens, wage garnishments.
Every day we hear stories like this about good folks who are simply struggling to pay their bills. Each of them are living a frightening IRS tax nightmare, and they are afraid it will destroy their lives.
I'm a divorced single mom, and my ex-husband left me and the kids with a lot of unpaid bills, including unpaid taxes. I was really starting to show my stress on my kids because the IRS had sent me a letter demanding a huge payment from me. I couldn't afford it. So then the IRS was threatening to garnish my wages. I'm already living paycheck to paycheck. That would have put me over the edge financially.
It truly seemed hopeless, but then a friend at work told her to call the tax relief line.
The people at the tax relief line, they told me about something called innocent spouse relief. They worked it out so that all of the taxes from my ex are not my problem. I don't know how that works, and I don't care. All I care about is that I don't owe the IRS a dime, and they are not going to take my paycheck.
Even if it seems hopeless, you should call the number on your screen right now. There is absolutely no cost for the call or the consultation. You are under no obligation. If you are worried that the IRS could garnish your wages, seize your assets, even take your home, call us right now. The Tax Relief Line is here to help you. Now you have a knowledgeable, professional team of tax experts that are ready to negotiate with the IRS and fight for you to save you money. The Tax Relief Line's professionals have successfully negotiated thousands of cases, reducing and sometimes even eliminating the tax debt for their clients. It's very easy to get started. Simply call the number on your screen right now. You don't have to live in fear anymore. The call and the consultation are free.